20 years, CAGBC has supported the building sector as it transitions to buildings that are better for the people and the planet. To celebrate our 20th anniversary, we're hosting conversations with members who have had an impact on the organization. We're happy to have with us one of the co-founders of CAGBC in Reimagine's Vivian Manasc, who is joined by emerging green leader Christina Michayluk, sustainability specialist at Footprint. Together, they represent the past and the future of green building, and we're looking forward to your conversation. Thank you both for joining us. Now I'll turn my camera off and give the floor to you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much. It's so great to be with you here, Vivian. This is great.
Yes, I'm excited to have this conversation, Christina. Looking forward to it for sure.
Great. I guess I'll start with some questions to you. So, as we know, the CAGBC is celebrating its 20th anniversary this year, which is just fantastic. How are you involved in the founding of the CAGBC 20 years ago?
Wow, it was quite the adventure 20 years ago, because a number of us, architects and engineers and planners across the country really sensed that there was a need for a Canadian green building organization. And actually, I was in Chicago at the time when the US GBC was founded in '92, and I'd been quite excited about that initiative and really about the direction that the US had taken. And in Canada, there were a couple of different sort of points of view of how a Green Building Council should be formed. And the approach that the US had taken was very much a grassroots approach, where there was a large base of support for the green building movement, and it was across architecture, engineering, construction, manufacturing, fabrication. It's just really exciting to see so many industries and so many enterprises paying attention to the future of sustainability. And so it made sense to me that we would have a similar type of an organization in Canada. And although there were differences of opinion as to how our Canadian GBC should be formed, I was always very much on the side of having a grassroots style of organization that was very broadly based. And so I became really involved in advocating for a Green Building Council, and I attended all the original founding meetings across the country. And it was an extremely heady and exciting time because so many people were getting in to this conversation. And ultimately, we carried the day, and a group of us formed the founding board of the Green Building Council. So that was, that's sort of a bit of a Coles Notes of how it began. But it all sort of started from '93 in Chicago, and then sort of made its way through till the late '90s in Canada.
What do you remember most about those early days?
I guess I remember the excitement of it. Like, I remember just how much momentum there was and how many people that were really passionate about creating a green building movement, and that how important it became that we actually create an organization. Because I think those of us who were working in green buildings and were designing green buildings already at the time, realized that without an institutional framework, they would just continue to be one-off examples of, somebody did something cool and then nothing else happened. And so the importance of having an institution that would further this work and really build the momentum and deepen the access across the country was very exciting. So yeah, there was just so much energy.
Great. So you've talked about the motivation. Who were the architects of this enterprise?
Well, there was definitely Peter Busby, Kevin Hydes, Joe Van Bellingham. There were a number of people across the country who were, very, very engaged in different ways. But those were the people who really kind of led the charge, I would say.
How did those early years impact the direction of your career?
sorry, the direction of
your career?
Of my career. Well, you know, I think a lot of the work that we were doing then was really about broadening the conversation. So, you know, I remember very clearly the discussion about market transformation and just saying that, you know, really what the Green Building Council was designed to create a transformation of the market. And so part of the work that I was doing early on, and definitely others, many others too, was really teaching and coaching and learning from others. I remember, you know, traveling across the country, coast to coast, numerous times, teaching lead courses and teaching green buildings courses, both for the RAIC and for the CAGBC. And so I think one of the things that was really influential was just that I got to know a lot of people in that process, and a lot of people in our industry, a lot of architects, a lot of engineers, became great colleagues and great friends over a very long time. So I think that was a really big part of the early days of my career, is just building that sort of across Canada network of people who were interested and curious and passionate.
Great. So now fast forward to 2022. How is the organization the same and how is it different?
Well, you know, CAGBC is still trying to work on market transformation, which is great. And I'm excited to see the focus on net zero right now, the focus on decarbonizing. So I think CAGBC has continued to stay in the forefront. I think that's been really important and continues to be really important, is to, you know, just continue to do good work and do good advocacy. I think on the advocacy front, or on the ability to sort of influence public policy, I think the CAGBC has come a long, long way. You know, in the early days, it was just a small group of people sort of making a lot of noise. But now I think the organization has really effective advocacy, and so it's managing to influence policy at the federal level and the provincial level across the country. So I think that's a huge, you know, step forward.
And your ideal practice paradigm is one in which architects do more than design new green buildings. Can you explain this approach?
Well, I'm really interested in the idea that we have a big challenge ahead of us in order to address climate change, in order to address the need for smarter, lower carbon built environment. And clearly there's a lot more existing buildings than there are new ones. And so if we don't address existing buildings, then we aren't going to get there. We're not going to meet the 2030 challenge. Or the 2050 challenge, as it's now been moved out a little bit. I remember actually when the 2030 challenge was first launched was at the RAIC conference in Edmonton in 2005. And 2030 seemed a really long ways away. And of course, here it is just around the corner. So I think we're all realizing that if we don't actually materially impact existing building stock, we won't achieve our climate goals and reduce our footprint. So, to use your word, so our focus is really on reimagining existing buildings, as well, of course, as continuing to design really good net zero, green, healthy new buildings. But reimagining existing buildings is extraordinarily important. And it's extraordinarily difficult because the economics of really improving the performance of existing buildings is really a challenge. But I think that's really an area of focus for our practice to actually make that possible. Oh, I can't hear you now.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah. So yeah, that's where those are some of the things that I think have been big shifts, I think. I've got some questions for you then. When and how did you become active with CAGBC?
Great question. I actually became involved through school. So I went to school at State in the Architectural Technologies program, and one day, the CAGBC with the Emerging Green Builders program at the time decided to come to our program to do a Green Building 101. I came for the free pizza and stayed with the information and was able to, learn a lot about the CAGBC and get to know who they were. And then I started attending events and eventually started helping out at these events, and then eventually became part of the Emerging Green Professionals and the chair of the program from there. So it's been a very great, I think, like 7 years of working with them.
Oh, neat. Very cool. And so how is that helping you grow your green building career? How's that involvement making a difference?
Well, being part of this amazing group of people, people who are really passionate about green buildings and all the changes that we should be making. So being a part of this community has been huge in my development in my career. But then obviously the CAGBC is providing us with resources and education and all of these items, and every single webinar I've attended have really been able to help me expand my knowledge and make me a better consultant, make me a better green leader, and make me more passionate about these things every day.
Lovely, lovely. And what do you see as some of the challenges for the next generation of green building leaders? What are you focusing on, and does the CAGBC help in some way?
Oh, that's a great question. I think, well, long-term wise, like long-term buildings, designing for long-term and resiliency, I think is really, really important, and something that we're hearing more about the effects of climate change and how those are impacting how we design buildings, but also talking about, carbon emissions and, the reduction of emissions through, embodied carbon and operational carbon are very, very important and definitely part of the 2030, 2050 goal frameworks. And the CAGBC has been able to provide like amazing education on these areas through their webinars and just all the industry experts being able to share their knowledge and their case studies and their expertise. And I think that's, a huge part of, the advocacy and the education with the CAGBC is it's so helpful in gaining these resources when people aren't necessarily right beside you to get them as well for those people too. So it's been great to be able to have those resources.
That's awesome. Now, you seem to have some solid expertise in in-depth life cycle analysis. What got you interested in that, and what motivated to make that your specialty?
Footprint actually gave me the opportunity to learn it, which was a fantastic opportunity for me. We had heard learning about embodied carbon and life cycle assessments and how this can make a building even better or a bit more thoughtful. So I was given the opportunity to learn and have just kind of been rolling with it and trying to gain as much knowledge as I can in the area and provide the best client care I can on this topic. And it's definitely growing opportunity, the way that we've seen things go, changes to municipalities and rezoning applications, and all these things are making it a lot more a part of my everyday agenda now, which has been fantastic. It's been a great opportunity to learn and to take it under my wing and go with it.
Yeah, that's such an important area, life cycle analysis, right? That's definitely something that hadn't gotten as much attention in the early days of the green building movement, but it's it was always there, but now it's finally getting its day in the sun, right?
Exactly, and it's so exciting to be working on it and being able to speak to students about it too. I think is really interesting. We talk about designing these buildings and meeting code, and when you actually start talking about the actual impact of these buildings on the environment, that's where it's part of such an interesting conversation.
Yeah, it really gets people's attention and gets people thinking long term, right?
Exactly.
Oh, that's cool.
Excellent. Well, I guess another question for you. Where do you think the CAGBC should focus in the next 20 years?
Yeah, no, great question. And, obviously, as I was saying earlier, like existing buildings, still a huge area. I mean, we definitely have a big challenge in front of us. And, there might need to be more incentives, more accreditations, more focus on existing buildings is definitely a big challenge, I think, ahead for the green building movement. And how do we kind of make it appealing for owners of large existing buildings to shift their thinking about the carbon footprint and their energy performance beyond just what the utility bills are, to actually looking at what impact their building is having on the environment, and really how can we radically reduce that impact. So I think that's one area that I'd love to see the CAGBC pay attention to. And of course, in my mind, more than ever, CAGBC also needs to focus on people. I mean, one of the things I've always loved, and one of the, in my mind, genius elements of the US and Canadian GBC is that people can be LEED accredited, right? And so it's not just about buildings, it's actually about people and about your own professional development. And so maybe we need additional certifications for people. Maybe we need to have net zero energy professionals, or maybe we need to have, beyond LEED accredited professionals, some other iteration or some other kinds of badges, because I think in this day and age, more than ever, people are looking for micro credentials. People are looking for credibility and to distinguish themselves in the community. And our green building movement has absolutely benefited from the idea that people can be LEED accredited professionals, and that it isn't just the buildings. And I think that was one of the big innovations that the US Green Building Council and then the Canadian Green Building Council came up with relative to other green building rating systems that existed before LEED, but never had this element of people being accredited. And so I think that's really part of the genius, and I think we can expand that a little bit further. So that's my sense of where the CAGBC could focus in the next 20 years. But what about you? What are you thinking?
Definitely agree with you on the existing buildings. It's such a huge part of our building stock, and we really need to focus on it, especially if we want to be making our 2030, 2050 goals. And I think in the CAGBC as well, like something they should be doing is continuing our conversations with our young professionals and students. I'm a big advocate, because I think that these aren't always the topics that are being taught in schools, and it's great to be able to provide them the additional resources so that they can become passionate about it, and then they can become the movers and the shakers of our industry in the future. The ones that are in school right now are going to be the principals of firms in so many years, and we want them to, be leading the charge on these, like you've done. So I think it'd be great to continue that focus on students and that education as well.
Yeah, great point. Great point. Great. Well, I think we've pretty much covered a lot of our topics there.
Thank you very much for your time and insights today. I think include this great interview with this final question about CAGBC's future. Thank you for sharing your journey with CAGBC as we build our way to a more sustainable future. Thank you very much for your time today.
Well, thank you. Thanks for the opportunity. And Christina, great to see you, and hope to see you again shortly.
Yes, great to see you, and thanks so much for the opportunity.
We are building our way forward to a sustainable future.